machine to travel into the future. So please welcome, together with Paolo, to our latest creation, Maxima Amator.
So very clearly, this room was inspired by the birth of these speakers, the Sonus Faber Maxima Amators. These are very special speakers, and in this video we'll talk about why they're such special speakers. But most importantly, when they introduced this speaker in that video, and the full video will be in the link description below for you to check out, that room that these speakers were introduced in was so beautiful, just so mesmerizing, and it captured my heart in a way enough for me to go crazy and make this change in this room just so I can get the maximum experience of the Maxima Amators. No pun intended. And so I set upon a journey to build this room and add these quadratic diffusers that weighs over 450 pounds added onto the wall. And I have to really thank my Patreon Darren and my friend Tujin for helping me out and building this room. But all in all, the inspiration did come from these speakers 100%, and I was dying to hear these speakers in this space where I basically tried to replicate what they had going on as close as possible. Of course, it is not exactly the same. It cannot be exactly the same because obviously this room is different from theirs. These quadratic diffusers were made specifically for this room. But you may ask, what is so special about this speaker that it drove Jay to make such a big change in my listening space? Of course, it is generally a good listening space for any speakers. To add a quadratic diffuser like this, 450 pounds, that is definitely a good step forward. But what made me make that move now? Because of these speakers. And there's no doubt that it was because of these speakers. More on the quadratic diffusers on another video. In this video, we give the spotlight to these speakers and my experience with them. So let me take you on a journey with me on my viewpoint and my experience with the Maxima Amators, but also in comparison to its previous bookshelf version, the Amator 3s, that I loved and adored so much, and what is different about them, what is similar about them, and which one should I choose, and which one should perhaps you choose if you decide to do so. Hey guys, how's it going? It's Jay here, and hope you guys had a little bit of fun watching that video, because that intro took a lot of time making it, but also it was kind of like a mimic of what they did in the original release video of the Maxima Amator. So, you know, it only fits because, as you can see, this room was again built with that inspiration from that video, from that room they had introduced the Maxima Amators. So what is so special about this speaker? That's the first thing we'll talk about in this video, but we will also talk about the build quality, the sound quality, and also the value proposition there, of course, with some examples and comparisons with the Amator 3 and some of the gear that I used with these speakers in the time I had with them. Now, I've had these speakers for quite a while now. Sonus Faber has been extremely patient with me with these speakers, so I thank them for that. And it's very rare for someone to, in fact, review the Amator 3, the bookshelf, and the Maxima side by side. But I already did a full video on the Amator 3 speakers, and I'll link that in the description below for you to watch. But this speaker is a little bit different. The Maxima Amators are speakers that Sonus Faber has never done before. You see, the Amator is a speaker that has been done before. I mean, you can kind of tell it from the name itself. We now have the Amator 3. There was the one there was the 2. And it has a history behind the Electa Amator, the name of that speaker, right? It was a speaker that's been there. It's just been improved upon with newer technology, newer parts, and better craftsmanship, and so on. But Maxima Amator that we have here, the floor standard, is something that Sonus Faber has never done before. And that is partially due to the struggle of making a cabinet with solid walnut, especially when it's a floor standard of this size. A cabinet of this size in solid walnut is not easy. And the reason being, I think I mentioned this in the Electa Amator 3 review as well, but even bookshelves, any cabinet usually uses MDF or particle boards, but using solid wood brings out a lot of challenges. And one of them being the fact that solid wood is very inconsistent compared to MDF or particle boards. So the density has to be right, the wood itself has to be structurally right for the cabinet. And according to Sonus Faber, and I've mentioned this in my Electa Amator 3 review as well, they go through an extreme process to make sure the drying of these speaker cabinets are perfect, the density is perfect, everything is perfect to be able to be used for a speaker cabinet design. So it's an extreme process which takes a long time, and it takes tremendous care and attention to detail. And so in the end, what you get is a cabinet that is actually made like a real instrument. And that's exactly how Sonus Faber treats the speaker. So honestly, 1,000 words cannot describe how beautiful the speaker really is. So let me just show you more of it on camera. So here's like the solid wood finish. I mean, it's absolutely just beautiful, just gorgeous. This front, all leather. All leather. All leather. We'll come back to the black marble in a minute. But in the back, I can't show you here. Just bump up the ISO here a little bit. All leather. All leather. The back. It's not somewhere you see very often, and yet all leather. Just incredible. Here, black marble. This is African black granite. It's a material that is known to be very dense. It's very heavy. Now this speaker, to give you a reference, it's kind of awkward to hold. It's not that it's too heavy. It is fairly heavy, but just because the bottom is just so heavy, it is kind of hard for me to lift it by myself. I kind of have to just pivot it around. Again, if you see it from the front, it's just gorgeous. It has angles to the cabinet as well. You can see here. It's not just flat. There's some angles going on down here. And it's just perfect. I don't see any imperfections obviously at this price point, but you'll be surprised. You'll be surprised depending on the brand. Again, you have like brass Sonus Faber accents going on here. And you have brass accents on the side of the speakers here. Just little details, just incredible details on the speaker. So I just turned the speaker around to show you the back of the speakers here in better lighting, but look at that crossover. Look at that crossover. So the back, like I said, it's not somewhere you see very often, but just the beauty of just even from the back, just breathless. Like even in person, this is even more gorgeous. Made in Italy, as you can see here. And you can see parts here using Clarity audio capacitors, Mundorf capacitors, high quality inductors. You can see it. And this is their new crossover, obviously, for this speaker. But I just love the fact that you can see all the quality components in there. And it's just freaking gorgeous. Like that black marble, like the color matching, the design is just absolutely breathtaking. Like, look at the binding post. Like, this is the thing. I take pleasure in changing cables on this speaker. Like, that's such a weird thing to say, but like even this feels luxurious. Look at that tab right there. Like, usually my fingers are in pain when I always adjust and undo binding posts. This is just a pleasure, just I can do this all day. I can do this all day. Like, it's almost a shame that you usually plug in the cables once and you're done and you never almost ever see the binding post again. But just a pleasure. Okay, so you may be like, okay, Jay, we get it. We get the craftsmanship. We get that it's beautiful. I know that you're a fan, but come on. How about the sound? How about the technology? And truth be told, come on. I'm an audiophile. I'm someone who loves music, who loves sound. If this was just a furniture, I would just go get a beautiful furniture. This is not just about the beauty. The beauty is just an added factor. This speaker sounds great, and we'll get into the sound in a minute, but the technology still exists in the speaker that we saw on the Amator 3. We're talking about the DAD tweeter, the Damped Epic Storm tweeter, that is in the top of the line iyagi speaker. We're talking about 186,000 Canadian dollars, even more so now probably because of the conversion rate. But at the time when I was working at the high-end retail store, the top of the line speaker from Sonus Faber, the iyagi, was 186 Canadian dollars, 186,000 Canadian dollars. That speaker uses the same tweeter as the Maxima here. So, and not my words, but Pablo's words, the head engineer, the top chief of Sonus Faber, the designer, he said it in the video. This is the best Sonus Faber transducers used in the speaker. The best tweeter. I'm so sorry that was so terrible. I was trying to impersonate the Italian accent. I'm terrible at it. But whole point being, this speaker uses a very good tweeter. One of the, well, not one, but the best tweeter available that Sonus Faber uses. Again, the woofer is a paper pulp woofer, 6.5 inches, absolutely beautiful. We saw it on the Amator 3. But again, I love paper woofers, especially the ones that Sonus Fabers make and use on their speakers. Just absolutely gorgeous and sounds incredible, and it really performs. The tone is just next to none. It clearly creates that something called the Sonus Faber tone, and I think it's safe to say it's something that I hear across most Sonus Faber speakers. This almost not chocolatey. That's like really old Sonus Fabers. I don't find these chocolatey whatsoever. Very far from chocolatey, but almost like a texture that you can almost feel. It's kind of hard to explain, but we'll talk more about the sound later on. All in all, I think that these speakers do a better job of extracting whatever these drivers can provide, even better than the Amator 3s. Now, my preference, we'll talk about that in a minute as well, but it's that these speakers are just, from a technical standpoint, definitely a better speaker, and we'll talk about why that is. And we already talked about this, but it looks like this is just a longer version, a tower version of the two-way design we saw on the bookshelf speaker. You just stretch it. What's so hard about it? But we already talked about why it's hard. And again, to achieve it, they have 3 different chambers for the speaker. We have the top chamber, the bottom chamber, and the chamber for the crossover. So 3 chambers, and the bottom is very heavy for a reason, using inert material, as they call it, and different fillings inside the cabinet to get rid of any resonances as well. So all in all, they may look very similar, but the point I'm trying to get across here is that the Amator 3 and the Maxima are 2 very different speakers. And so the sound is also very different. So if anything you take away from this video, take away that they are very different. They may look a little bit similar, but they're far from just a floor standard version of the bookshelf. They're far from that. So let's talk about the sound now. Okay, so these speakers have a sound that is deeper than the Amator 3s as expected of a floor standard. It has a deeper bass extension. In fact, you'll be very surprised how this two-way speaker has this amount of bass extension. Now, these speakers, I feel like extend even further in room than the spec frequency response they put on their website. Like, I actually feel it in my chest, and I did not expect that. Like, it's very similar to like hearing a Wilson audio speaker or Focal speaker, and you hear that bass and it's just very punchy and hits you in the chest. It has more of that direct hit than the Amator 3. The bass is very high-end. It's very textured. One of the most textured bass that you will ever hear, in my opinion. That's what I love about this speaker. Now, however, the frequency response is a bit more linear than the Amator 3. In the beginning, I got the sense that the Amator 3 had more bass. And I was like, that's not right. That's not right because the Amator 3 is a bookshelf speaker. However, that was not the case. It's just that the Amator 3 just seems to have more bass because it has more mid-bass presence. And that was the beauty with the Amator 3, is that it has so much of that mid-bass punch and dynamic, and also that a little bit of bloom and over-exaggeration in the mid-bass area, which also adds to the tone, which makes the male voices more deeper, around that 100 hertz to 200 hertz area. So it makes the instruments like, the bass and even the cello and stuff like that seem more grand and more kind of like masculine kind of sound, like more girthy, right? More girthy. It's a terrible expression, but you know what I'm talking about. It gives you more of that thickness, right? And sound quality. Sounds so wrong, but that's like the only way to explain it. I think most of you will understand, but for those of you that are just getting into this hobby and you hear me say this, you may be like, what kind of psychopath? Anyways. But again, with the Maxima, you don't quite get that, which means the tone is different on the speaker from the Amator 3, almost entirely. And that's why I say they are nothing alike in most ways in terms of sound quality. They do carry around a little bit of that Sonus Faber tone, but these actually remind me more of the Olympica, which is actually a totally different line that Sonus Faber has. Olympica is more of a modern approach to, Sonus Faber speakers. This is the Heritage series. So with the Heritage series, they kind of go for usually a little bit more refined version of the older sound, so it has that little bit of character. Whereas the Olympica line I found is to be more neutral and less and more preserved in terms of the expression of that Sonus Faber sound. There's still an expression, just much more neutral than the Heritage line. But these remind me of more of the Olympica line. They're much more refined, much more neutral. Like I feel like if this speaker was in a different cabinet, like in the Olympica cabinet, then I would be like, yeah, it's fine. That's what an Olympica sounds like. No, they're not that similar, but I'm just trying to make a point here. It's a much more modern sound than the Amator 3. These, if you like more neutral sound, more extended highs, more refinement in the high frequency, more detail, more nuance in the high frequency and mid-range, then these are, I think, it. So for example, this is gonna be a hilarious thing to do, but if I go, then the Sonus Faber Amator 3 would make it sound a little bit more masculine, like, oh, that was I'm terrible, but you get the point. It makes it more like bassy, more texture in the mid-bass region. Whereas this speaker is more faithful. Like if I go, it will produce, just the same. So it's more of a reference than the Amator 3 in terms of that neutrality and extended high frequency and detail retrieval. And overall, it's a more flat, neutral sounding speaker with just a touch of that Sonus Faber, mid-bass energy, but not to an extent you'll notice. Like if you hear it side by side with other speakers, you'll be like, there's something special about the Maxima that grabs you and pulls you in, but you don't know exactly what it is. And it's not just about that mid-bass bump. Don't mistake here. I mean, I'm not talking about just bumping up that 100 hertz or 200 hertz with an equalizer. It's the entire frequency. It's the entire craftsmanship. It's the use of wood material, a solid wood material, use of natural, materials to make an instrument that sound and have resonance like this. Sonus Faber is famous for using resonances to their benefit. They're not a company that fights resonance. They fight resonances that are unwanted. They are a company that takes care of unwanted resonances and play around with resonances they appreciate and is musical. I mean, resonance is not always a bad thing. You have to understand guitar creates resonance, technically speaking. String instruments operate out of resonance, technically speaking. It's just about using the right type of resonance that is musical to your ears. And that's what Sonus Faber does very well. So now let's talk about sound staging and imaging, because I think that's where the differences really lie. Okay, so in terms of sound staging, let's talk about two things. There's the width and then the depth, right? So in terms of the width, I find that these speakers are actually slightly more wider than the bookshelf. And usually that's not the case. Usually the bookshelf is the one that has a wider soundstage, usually, just because of physics. But in this case, I find that these speakers, because of setup, benefit from a wider soundstage. And why that is because these speakers, I find, is better when they're out towards the room with just a little bit of toe in, not too much, just a smidge. I'm talking about like 5-10 degrees of just slight toe in. And I find that to be the perfect balance between imaging and sound staging in width. But again, back to sound staging. We'll talk about imaging in a minute. So in that case, if you set it up that way with the speakers facing out towards the room more with a slight bit of toe in like we just discussed, then you get a wide sound stage, even more so than the Amator 3. For reference, this is where the Amator 3 would be. And then this is where the Maxima speakers are with the same track. Obviously with variances in room and track. So now this is not something I can really show you because, you know, the wall only stretches so far, but just try to imagine past the wall. So for example here, right? This is where the Amator 3 would be versus this is where the Maximas are. And again, when I say deepness, it's how far behind the speakers as well, but also imagine the layering, meaning the sound that is in between those things on that up to the point of where you are sitting down. So everything, the instruments and so on, is in between that as well. So that's what layering is. So for example, again, if that didn't make sense to you, if it did, you can skip to the next part. But for those of you that didn't, so let's say there's a singer here, and then there's a singer more in the back, and then there's a singer way more in the back. Hearing those three different singers or instruments in their respective space, in their respective original space where they were recorded, hearing this guy here, and then the guy here, and the guy over there, all at once, but you're able to decipher all those little details in between. That's what layering is. So when you sit down and listen to it, you go like, wow, I feel like the first singer is closer to me, and then the guy is there, and the other guy is even further. And you hear all those different notes or instruments or the singer, you know, and you can decipher, which allows you to hear and appreciate the music more than if you were hearing everything at once and they just sound like they're just one plane. They all sound like they're in the same space, same, you know, stage. So that's what layering is. Hope that made sense to you. Let me know in the comments if that made sense to you and if that kind of clarified a little bit, and if you like the way I'm explaining sound here, I'll do that more visually, even though I'm running out of breath because talking and walking back and forth. But anyways, the Maximas win in terms of both, you know, sound staging, depth, and width in comparison to the bookshelf, which is odd. Usually it's the other way around because of the design, physics. But in this case, my experience has been that the Maxima is better that way. Imaging. Again, imaging is better on the Maxima. Even when you tow it out towards the room, like we just discussed, the imaging is just perfectly down in the middle. Meaning, if you set up the speakers right, like I said, even if it's facing out towards the room, you don't have to have it pointed towards you. Just, if it's the right distance, if I'm right in the middle, you'll hear me right in the middle. Not to one side, right? You won't hear me more from the left channel or more from the right channel, but you'll hear me right down the middle. Just simple as that. Anything that is recorded to have the sound right down the middle, like the singer's voice, usually, you will hear it right down the middle. Pinpoint. So now talking about the gear that I used with the Maxima and the Amator 3. So I had it for a while. I had these speakers for a while, like I said in the beginning of this video. So I had a lot of chances to try with many different gear that came in here. Tube, solid state, Class D, Class A, B, Class A, you name it. And truth be told, I think from the reasonable price ranges that I'm willing to go with, I think Denafrips Apollo is the one that I would choose, because these speakers, while they sound amazing with tube amplifiers as well, like the Deckware, they do truly benefit from a very powerful transistor amp. And the Apollo has enough drive, has enough reservoir, has enough just hit, and the sound complements each other, because the Apollo has like this robust bottom end that kind of complements what the Sonus Faber is all about. And again, I swear that this video is not sponsored by Denafrips or Sonus Faber, but I have to say that the DAC I've been using for a while now, and if you've been watching my videos, then you know I've been using the Terminator Plus, which is also a Denafrips DAC. And that also complements the rest of the system pretty well, because the Terminator Plus is just a very kind of like detailed, micro nuanced, and I have a full video on the Terminator Plus, so you can check it in the description below. But that really helps with deciphering all the little details that we're talking about in terms of the soundstage, right? The depth really gives you a lot of that, you know, spacing and interpretation of space around instruments. So it helps with that. So that's why I've been using the Terminator Plus with the Maxima especially. And of course, I do prefer analog for the most part. So if I do have the music format, then I played my MoFi turntable, the Ultra Deck Plus, and also my, you know, reel-to-reel techniques, baby, reel that reel. It's just the best format, but just not enough music available on it. Now, in terms of the preamplifier, I didn't have a lot of choices. I'll be quite frank with you. When I was using a tube amplifier, I rather preferred to run it directly to the Deckware, because the Deckware has a volume pot. However, when I was using it with the Apollo, I was using the preamplifier from Denafrips again. I swear, I'm not sponsored by Denafrips. But it just so happens that these gear just sound amazing with the Sonus Faber. I would love to try gear like Name, Macintosh, perhaps Accuphase with the Maxima, but those are again kind of higher end gear that is very pricey, and that would make sense for a speaker like this. I do agree, but I did not get a chance to do that just yet. But as you know, the final question remains: which one would I get, and which one am I getting? Because quite frankly, I think I told you guys that I'm gonna get either the bookshelf or the floor stander, and really I'm not decided because both are so good. I've been living with them for months now, and I think I've been living with the Amator 3 for almost 6 months, half a year. But both, I can both like appreciate both of them in their own way. They're both Sonus Faber sound in a different approach. So I'm gonna end this video by saying that my wallet is about to cry because I am buying both of them.